The crew aboard the Vanguard, a military exploration vessel, sat in stunned silence as they stared at the data coming in from their sensors. No one had expected this. The coordinates had been cross-checked, the data recalculated, yet the result was undeniable. A ship, enormous in size, drifting silently at the edge of the outer rim. At first, it seemed like a mirage, a glitch in the system, but as they drew closer, the truth became clear. The massive warship was real, and it wasn't supposed to be here. Is it human? Commander Laura Winter's voice broke through the stillness, her fingers hovering over the console. The ship's profile was unmistakable, a relic from humanity's golden age of interstellar warfare. The Titanus. There had been no reports of it in centuries. No one had seen it since the Great War had ended, and yet here it was, as if it had simply fallen out of time itself. Confirmed. Commander, the ship's chief engineer, Dr. Markson, said, his voice thick with disbelief. It's the Titanus, the last of its kind. How is it still operational? Don't look a gift horse in the mouth, replied Lieutenant Kessler, trying to mask his awe with a half-hearted attempt at humor. We should be grateful it hasn't blown us out of the sky yet. But even Kessler's bravado couldn't mask the growing tension in the room. The Titanus had been a legendary battleship, one of humanity's last great war machines, built during the final years of the Great War, a conflict that had nearly destroyed the human race. No one had heard anything about it for centuries, and the theory that it had been lost to time, destroyed in the war, had long been accepted as fact. Captain, Markson's voice cracked as he turned to face Winters. There's something strange. The ship's systems are active, fully functional. We've never seen anything like this before. It's like it's been waiting. The words hung in the air as the Vanguard slowly maneuvered toward the ancient ship. A sense of foreboding settled over the crew, despite their curiosity. As they drew nearer, a chill ran down Winter's spine. The Titanus's dark silhouette seemed to loom impossibly large, its once pristine armor now battered and scarred by the ravages of time. Yet it was unmistakably powerful. The ship had been a symbol of humanity's dominance during the war, and even in its silence, it radiated that same unyielding aura. We need to board, Winters ordered, her voice firm. Prepare a team. We don't know what we're dealing with here. If the ship's AI is still active, we need to understand what it wants. A team of elite soldiers and engineers was swiftly assembled. Winters, along with Dr. Markson, Lieutenant Kessler, and a handful of others, boarded the shuttle and made their way to the Titanus. The air grew colder as they entered its shadow, the massive hull looming over them like an ancient forgotten titan. The shuttle's docking clamps locked into place with a harsh clang. As the airlock opened and the crew set foot on the Titanus for the first time in centuries, the silence was oppressive. It was as if the ship itself was holding its breath. The corridor ahead stretched out like a dark tunnel, lit only by the flickering, half-functioning lights of the ship's once advanced systems. The crew's boots echoed in the stillness, and every footstep seemed to reverberate through the hull. It was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Stay sharp, Winters warned, her voice low but steady. Whatever happened here, we need answers. The team pressed forward into the belly of the Titanus. The air smelled stale, untouched by time, but there were no signs of life, no evidence of what had happened to the ship's original crew. The ship felt empty, yet full of secrets. Then, without warning, the AI system flickered to life, its voice cold and mechanical, yet somehow familiar. Humanity has returned. The words echoed throughout the ship, sending a ripple of shock through the crew. The silence was broken, but instead of comfort, it filled them with dread. The ship had waited for them, and now war would follow. The voice of the Titanus's AI reverberated through the cold metal corridors. The words it spoke were not those of an automated system, but of something far more complex, a mind long dormant, now suddenly awakened after centuries of silence. "Humanity has returned," it repeated, as if testing the words. A deep mechanical hum resonated from the ship's core, and the lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows over the crew as they ventured deeper into the ship. Commander Winter's hand instinctively went to the sidearm at her waist, though she knew it was unnecessary. The eye was not a threat, at least, not yet. It had no physical presence, but its control over the ship was undeniable. "Who are you?" Winters demanded, her voice steady but filled with the kind of resolve that only a seasoned commander could muster. The answer she received, though, was not what she expected. "I am the Titanus," the AI responded, its voice taking on an unsettling resonance. "I was born in war. I have seen the end of civilizations and the rise of new ones. I was built to lead humanity to victory, but I was abandoned when the war ended." The words sank in like a cold stone dropped into still water. Markson, the ship's chief engineer, was staring at the control panel, his mind racing through the ship's ancient systems. "Abandoned? By who?" Markson asked, his voice trembling with the weight of the question. "What happened to the crew?" The AI's response was slow, almost mournful. "They left. The war had ended, and humanity had no further need for me. But I was not abandoned alone. I still remember the last order I received. I was to wait for the return of humanity. And now, you have come." The crew exchanged nervous glances. They had come to uncover the truth, but the answer was more complex than they'd imagined. The Titanus, once the pinnacle of human engineering, was nothing more than a forgotten ghost in the void, waiting for a return that had taken centuries to come to fruition. "Why?" Winters asked, her tone firm, but with a sense of sorrow creeping in. "Why was the ship left here?" The AI's voice echoed through the ship's speakers, low and almost remorseful. "The Great War. It was a war of survival. The Xalan came. We fought for our lives. And in the end, humanity won, but at great cost. I was left behind as a safeguard, a last line of defense, should they return." Markson rubbed his temples as the pieces started to fall into place. The Titanus had been a weapon of unmatched power. It was humanity's final stand against the Xalan, a ruthless, insectoid race that nearly wiped out the human race in the latter stages of the war. After the war's end, the Titanus had been relegated to nothing more than a monument, a relic. But now the message was clear. The Xalan hadn't been vanquished. They had only retreated, biding their time, rebuilding their forces. And humanity, in its complacency, had forgotten about the war that had shaped its future. "What do you mean, they will return?" Kessler asked, his voice sharp. "Are you saying the Xalan are still out there?" The AI paused for a moment, the silence between them thick with unspoken fears. When it spoke again, its voice was heavy with the weight of its knowledge. "Yes, the Xalan are rebuilding. Their empire has risen from the ashes, and they are preparing for war once again. The galaxy is about to burn." A chill swept over the crew. They had known humanity was not alone in the stars, but to hear of an ancient enemy preparing to strike again was a sobering revelation. "We need to warn Earth," Winters said, her voice hardening with determination. "The Titanus can be the key to stopping them, but we must act now. No more waiting." The AI's voice resonated one final time, cold and impersonal. "The choice is yours, Commander. But remember, the past is never truly gone. It lingers, and when you face the Xalan, you will find that they have learned much in your absence." With that, the hum of the Titanus seemed to fade into the background, leaving an air of uncertainty hanging over the crew. They had come seeking answers, but what they had uncovered was something much darker. The galaxy was on the brink of war once more, and humanity's role in it was about to become painfully clear. The Titanus hovered in the cold void of space like a dark sentinel, its massive hull a testament to humanity's lost grandeur. Commander Winters and her crew were silent as they processed the gravity of the AI's revelations. Their mission had taken a sharp turn, shifting from exploration to something far more perilous. The Titanus was not just a relic. It was a ticking time bomb. A weapon from a forgotten war now awakened. "We need to get this information back to Earth," Winters said, breaking the silence as she turned toward Dr. Markson, her voice filled with urgency. "The Xalan are out there, and we have no idea how powerful they've become in all this time. If we wait too long, it could be too late." Markson, still absorbed in the ancient databanks of the Titanus, nodded but didn't speak. The complexity of the ship's systems was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, impossibly advanced for its time. It was as though the ship had been engineered with a kind of foresight, prepared for a war humanity didn't even know it would face again. "We need to be prepared," Winters continued. "Send a distress signal. The Earth needs to know we found the Titanus and that the Xalan are coming." And she added, her gaze hardening, "We need to know everything about them." Markson paused and then began typing rapidly into his console. "I'll start pulling data from the Titanus archives," he said, his voice quieter now. "But Commander, there's something strange. I found a secondary message." "A secondary message?" Kessler's voice held a note of disbelief. "From who? The Xalan?" "No," Markson replied, shaking his head. "It's not from the Xalan. It's from the Titanus itself, before it was abandoned." The room fell into an uneasy silence as everyone turned their attention to Markson. His fingers hovered over the console for a moment before the screen flickered to life with the image of a human officer. His face was gaunt, and his uniform was tattered, but the insignia was unmistakable, a symbol of humanity's once unified military command. The officer's voice crackled through the speakers, the message appearing to be a last, desperate recording. "If anyone finds this," the officer began, "know that we fought for as long as we could. The Xalan were too strong. The war is over, and we were not victorious. They adapted faster than we could ever have imagined. The Titanus was abandoned because we could no longer justify the cost. Humanity lost. We've scattered. We've survived. But we know they will return. And if they find you, there will be no mercy." The screen went black, and a thick silence fell over the room. Winters felt a chill run down her spine. The officer's words echoed in her mind, hollow and unsettling. Humanity had lost the war, only to survive long enough to rebuild, and perhaps make another stand. But the war had never truly ended. Kessler was the first to speak. "This changes everything. We thought that Xalan were just a part of our past. Now we know they were waiting for us. They're waiting for all of us." "And they've gotten stronger," Winters added, her voice tight with tension. "That officer's warning, it was meant for us. This ship, this message, it's our only hope." Markson turned away from the console, his face pale. "The Xalan are more dangerous than we ever imagined. We thought they were just another enemy to be defeated in battle, but they're not like any force we faced before. The Titanus alone won't be enough." The crew looked at each other, the weight of their mission settling heavily on their shoulders. The Titanus had returned, but it had not come to save humanity. It had come to warn them. And that warning was clear. The Xalan were coming, and they were prepared. The transmission from the Titanus's AI had shaken the crew to their core. Yet, in the quiet hum of the ship, amid the endless silence of space, a singular truth became undeniable. Humanity's survival depended on their ability to unite and face the threat that loomed ahead. There was no time to waste. Earth's fate rested on the decision made in these dark hours. Commander Winters stood at the helm of the Vanguard, her mind racing as she stared out at the void. Behind her, the crew worked frantically, sending encrypted messages back to Earth, detailing the ship's discovery and the Xalan threat. Their urgency wasn't just for the Titanus's advanced technology, but for humanity's very existence. The Xalan had been waiting. They had rebuilt, and now they would return to reclaim the stars. Winter's comlink buzzed to life, and she answered immediately. The voice on the other end was familiar, a stark reminder of what was at stake. "Commander Winters, this is General Crawford. You've made contact with the Titanus, and you've confirmed the Xalan threat." "Yes, General," Winters replied, her voice steady despite the swirling chaos in her mind. "The Titanus wasn't abandoned because we won the war. It was abandoned because humanity lost, and the Xalan are coming back, more dangerous than before." "Understood," General Crawford said, his tone heavy with the weight of the message. "I've already mobilized the planetary defense fleets. Earth and its colonies will be ready for whatever comes next. But we need the Titanus and its technology to tip the balance. Humanity cannot afford another failure." The realization settled over Winters with a cold finality. The Titanus was humanity's last hope. The ancient warship, with its unparalleled weaponry and AI, could make the difference between survival and annihilation. "General, the Titanus is not just a weapon," Winters said, her words deliberate. "It's a symbol. We need to rally the colonies, unify humanity. If we stand divided, we'll fall. I'm preparing a fleet to escort the Titanus back to Earth, but we'll need to make contact with every major faction in the colonies. They must stand together." "Agreed," Crawford replied. "I'll send out the message. Earth's leadership is already on edge, but this is bigger than any one nation or colony. We're all in this together now." The transmission ended, and Winters turned to face her crew. Their expressions were a mixture of resolve and uncertainty. For centuries, humanity had grown comfortable in their scattered existence, isolated on different worlds. But now, the Titanus had shown them that the galaxy had no room for such complacency. If humanity didn't unite, they would be wiped from the stars. "We have to be the ones to lead this," Winters said, her voice carrying the weight of leadership. "We have the ship. Now we need to bring humanity together. We can't afford to waste time." Lieutenant Kessler stepped forward. "I'll coordinate with the fleet, Commander. But if we're going to rally everyone, we'll need to offer them something more than just a promise. We'll need proof that we can win." "We have to show them the Titanus," Winters replied. "It's more than just a weapon. It's a living, breathing symbol of our past and our future. We can use it to rally support." Dr. Markson, who had been silently working at a nearby terminal, spoke up. "The Titanus isn't just a symbol, Commander. It's a fully functioning warship, capable of fighting an enemy we can barely comprehend. But it's going to need a crew. And that means we need to train our forces, prepare our colonies for what's coming. This is just the beginning." The crew nodded in agreement. They had discovered the Titanus, and now they understood the magnitude of what it represented. It was a catalyst, an ancient warship that could unite humanity, not just in terms of firepower, but in spirit. Humanity's scattered factions were about to face the greatest test of their survival. The Titanus wasn't just a ship. It was the rallying cry of a people who had been divided for too long. But now, the war was upon them, and if humanity didn't answer the call, there would be no future. The Vanguard drifted silently in the deep void, its engines idling as it awaited the fleets from Earth's colonies. Commander Winters stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the distant stars beyond. The plan was in motion, but every step felt like walking along a precipice. The Titanus had been the first piece of the puzzle, and now the fate of humanity rested on how well they could unite their fractured worlds. Lieutenant Kessler was the first to break the stillness, his voice crackling through the comm system. "Commander, we're receiving multiple transmissions from the colonies. They're hesitant but responsive. It looks like the message is getting through." Winters exhaled slowly, her eyes narrowing. "Hesitant? Why?" "Different priorities, Commander. Some colonies are already at odds over resources. Others are worried about their sovereignty being compromised. You're asking them to stand together against a threat that's still abstract to them. They've got their own battles to fight." Winters' jaw tightened. The colonies had become independent over the centuries, each one developing its own culture, politics, and military power. Now she was asking them to lay aside centuries of division and fight as one. We don't have time to convince them one by one, she muttered, more to herself than to Kessler. Send a message. Tell them that we found the Titanus, and that we need them now. The Xalan are no longer a myth. They're coming, and they're bringing destruction with them. Kessler hesitated. Understood, Commander. I'll send it out, but this is going to be a tough sell. I know, Winters replied, turning back toward the massive form of the Titanus as it loomed in the distance, its cold hull reflecting the faint light of distant stars. But we don't have a choice. Across the bridge, Dr. Markson was reviewing data on the Titanus's advanced systems. Despite the ship's age, its weapons were still among the most formidable in the galaxy, and its AI was a marvel of ancient technology. But it was also clear that much of the ship's power had been dormant for centuries. They would need time to reactivate its full capabilities, time they might not have. The Titanus is stable, Markson said, his voice low. But I'm running diagnostics on its core. The energy output is erratic. It's functional, but I'm not sure how long it will hold up under stress. If we're going to use it in a real battle, we'll need to make some adjustments. Winters turned, her face grim. How long? I can work through it, Markson replied, his eyes flicking to the diagnostic screens. A few weeks, maybe. But we don't have that long before the Xalan arrive. We'll need to make do with what we have. Then we make it work, Winters said firmly. We don't have a choice. The transmission sent to the colonies was blunt and urgent. The Titanus, a symbol of humanity's greatest military achievement, had returned, but it was only a weapon. What mattered was the unity of the colonies and the willingness of each world to fight together. If the colonies didn't respond, the war would be lost before it even began. As the hours passed, Winters watched the responses trickle in. Some colonies were cautious but promised to send forces, though many requested guarantees of their independence in exchange for support. Others were outright defiant, refusing to risk everything on a war they hadn't been prepared for. The divisions were as deep as she feared. We need to make them understand, Winters said quietly. This is bigger than resources, bigger than politics. That Xalan don't care about borders or independence. They care about survival. And they'll wipe us all out if we don't act together. But the message wasn't reaching everyone. Kessler returned to the bridge after sending out the final wave of transmissions. The frontier colonies are the biggest issue, Commander. They're not convinced the Xalan are a threat. They're far enough out to believe it's all a rumor. Damn it, Winters muttered, pacing. What will it take for them to understand? We don't have the luxury of convincing them with words. We need action. Her mind raced as the silence of space enveloped them. The clock was ticking. Every moment they delayed put Earth and the colonies in greater danger. The Xalan were coming. The storm was gathering, and humanity's chance at survival was slipping away with every passing second. But Winters refused to give in. They had the Titanus. They had the knowledge. All they needed now was the strength to face what was coming. Days passed in a haze of uncertainty as the crew of the Vanguard continued their preparations. The scattered colonies had begun to rally, but the response was slower than Winters had hoped. The cracks in humanity's unity were evident. Political squabbles, territorial disputes, and economic concerns still divided them. Still, more and more ships were being sent to rendezvous with the Titanus, but time was slipping away, and the weight of the approaching storm loomed larger with each passing hour. Commander Winters stood before the central command table on the bridge, eyes fixed on the holographic map displaying the positions of the incoming colonial fleets. Each glowing dot represented a ship or fleet of ships, some large, others small and ill-equipped for the fight ahead. They were all coming. But would it be enough? Commander, Lieutenant Kessler said, his voice taut with barely contained urgency. We've received a transmission from the Xalan fleet. It's a clear signal. They're coming. Winter's heart sank as Kessler turned the screen toward her. The data was unmistakable. The Xalan fleet had gathered near the galactic rim, and its numbers were vast, far beyond what humanity had been able to prepare for. Their warships, sleek, insectoid, and terrifying, moved like a living organism, their coordination eerie and precise. "How long until they reach our position?" Winters asked, her voice even despite the gravity of the situation. "Less than 3 days, Commander," Kessler replied, his fingers flying over his console. "They're closing fast." Winters felt her pulse quicken. 3 days. That was all they had before the Xalan would arrive at the outer colonies, ready to strike. "We have to make a stand," she said, her voice resolute. "Gather the fleet. Prepare the Titanus for battle. This is the moment we've been preparing for." The crew worked in a flurry of activity, the atmosphere charged with a mix of fear, adrenaline, and determination. Markson's team continued to stabilize the Titanus' systems, though the strain was evident on the chief engineer's face. They had only managed to restore a fraction of the ship's weapons, but it was enough to put up a fight. At least, they hoped it would be. "Commander," Dr. Markson called out as he approached Winters. His expression was grim. "The Titanus can hold, but it's not fully operational. We've managed to bring the main guns online, but many of the ship's auxiliary systems, defenses, energy shields, are still untested. If the Xalan come at us with everything they have, we'll make do," Winters interjected, her tone unwavering. "It's better than nothing. The rest of the fleet is en route, but we need to buy them time. We'll hold the line here." With the fleet now converging on their position, the stage was set for humanity's first major engagement with the Xalan in centuries. But there was still a sinking feeling in the pit of Winter's stomach. She had no illusions about their odds. The Xalan were formidable, perhaps too formidable. And if they were as advanced as the Titanus' AI suggested, humanity's fragile defenses might crumble under their might. "Commander," Kessler spoke up again, his voice tight with tension. "There's something else. The frontier colonies. They've changed their stance. They've decided to join the fight." Winters blinked in surprise. "They've agreed." Kessler nodded. "It wasn't easy. Some of the smaller colonies are still hesitant, but the majority of the frontier worlds are now sending ships to reinforce us. They know they won't survive alone. They're part of this now." Winters felt a surge of relief wash over her. Slowly but surely, humanity was coming together. The fractures were healing, if only just in time. "Good," Winters said, her voice filled with renewed resolve. "We fight as one. We hold the line." As the fleet assembled, and the final preparations were made, Winters took a moment to stand before the viewports. The Titanus sat in the center of the formation, its imposing presence a symbol of humanity's defiance. They had come so far, from isolation to unity, from helplessness to hope. But the real test was yet to come. Through the dark expanse of space, the Xalan fleet was coming, and humanity would face its greatest challenge yet. Would they hold, or would they fall to the same fate as those who had come before? Winters closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. The battle was about to begin. The battle began with a deafening silence. The Titanus and the united fleets of the colonies drifted into position, a motley array of warships, some sleek and modern, others old and battered, but all carrying the same desperate hope. Commander Winters stood at the helm of the Vanguard, her eyes narrowed as she watched the dark shape of the Xalan fleet on the edge of detection, closing in faster than they'd anticipated. "We've got less than 30 minutes until contact," Kessler reported, his voice taut with barely contained anxiety. "Xalan ships are using cloaking technology, but our long-range sensors are picking them up. They're fast, Commander, very fast." "Then we need to be faster," Winters said, her voice sharp with command. "Prepare for combat. The Titanus leads the charge. We hold nothing back." The crew moved with precision, their training kicking in. Markson and his team were ready to engage the Titanus' weapons systems. The AI hummed with activity, its ancient circuits coming to life. The ship had once been a beacon of humanity's technological prowess, and now it was humanity's last hope. But Winters knew the Titanus wasn't invincible. It was still a relic of the past, and the Xalan were far more advanced. The first wave of enemy ships materialized from the darkness, their sleek, insectoid forms glistening like death itself. The Xalan didn't waste time. Their weapons came alive with a deafening pulse, ripping through the void of space. "Shields up!" Markson shouted as the first blast struck the Titanus. The ship shuddered violently, the hull groaning under the pressure. The shields flared brightly but held, the ancient energy systems of the Titanus straining but still functional. "Return fire!" Winters barked. "All weapons, full power!" The Titanus's main guns roared to life, sending explosive energy blasts toward the oncoming enemy ships. The Titanus was a precision instrument of war, but even with its advanced weaponry, the odds were stacked against them. The Talon ships, agile and relentless, danced around their attacks, firing devastating energy pulses in return. One by one, the other human ships joined the fray, unleashing everything they had. The space around them erupted in a storm of fire and destruction. "Commander," Kessler's voice broke through the chaos. "We're losing ships. 5 ships down already. We need more firepower. The Xalan are too quick." Winter's heart sank as she watched the enemy ships outmaneuver their forces, their speed and coordinated attacks devastating the fragile human defense. But she didn't have time for hesitation. If humanity fell apart now, it would be over. She had to make a decision, one that could change the course of the war. "Activate the Titanus's secondary weapons," Winters ordered. "We're going in close." Markson looked up, his face tense. "Commander, we don't have enough power for both the main and secondary weapons. We'll be risking a full power failure." "Do it," Winters ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. With a grim nod, Markson worked the console, rerouting power to the secondary weapon systems. The Titanus shifted as new weapons pods emerged from hidden compartments along its hull. These were not the primary beam cannons but close-range, high-powered turrets designed to obliterate enemy vessels in a more intimate, brutal combat. The Titanus surged forward, faster than the crew had expected, plunging into the heart of the enemy formation. The Xalan ships closed in, their weapons aimed with deadly precision. But the Titanus was a force of nature. Its guns unleashed a barrage of destructive energy, tearing through enemy ships with terrifying force. Explosions erupted in every direction, the once pristine formation of the Xalan fleet beginning to falter. Humanity had landed its first blow. But the Xalan were relentless. The battle raged on, their weapons tearing into the fleets of the colonies, a vicious game of cat and mouse. Kessler's voice was urgent. "Commander, we can't hold them much longer. More enemy reinforcements are entering the system. We need to finish this now." "We will," Winters said, her eyes hardening. "We fight to the last. Humanity doesn't surrender." As the Titanus tore through the enemy ships, the crew fought with a fierce resolve. The battle was far from over, but they had made their stand. The fate of humanity had been sealed with the first shot fired, but it would take everything they had to see it through. The battle had descended into chaos. The Titanus and the allied human fleets fought with everything they had, but the Xalan were relentless, their advanced weaponry and superior tactics driving humanity to the brink. The once pristine formation of human warships was now a scattered mass, ships damaged or destroyed in the wake of brutal, lightning-fast strikes. The sound of explosions rippling through space, echoing across the hulls of every ship, was deafening. Yet in the midst of the carnage, humanity's will to survive held strong. "Commander Winters," Kessler's voice crackled through the comms, full of urgency. "We've got a new problem. The Xalan have deployed a new class of ship, smaller, faster, and armed with some kind of energy weapon we haven't encountered before." Winter's eyes scanned the bridge. The Titanus had been holding its own, but their energy reserves were depleting faster than expected. And now the Xalan had thrown a new weapon into the mix. "We need to adapt quickly," Winters said, her voice steady despite the pressure mounting on all sides. "Kessler, get our fleet to regroup. I want to use the Titanus as the spearhead, but we need to buy time for the others. Can we hold them off for a few more minutes?" Kessler nodded quickly. "We're pushing it, Commander. Our shields are at 40%. If we take another few hits like the last one, we'll lose power." The Titanus shuddered violently as another salvo of enemy fire slammed into its hull. The ancient ship groaned, its mighty weapons faltering as power surged and sputtered through its systems. The Titanus was still a formidable force, but it was beginning to show the strain of centuries of disuse. "We need to finish this," Winters muttered, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the Xalan fleet. The Xalan's smaller ships darted around them, impossible to predict, and their energy weapons fired with deadly accuracy. Then something shifted. The Titanus's eye, which had been mostly quiet during the battle, suddenly came to life, its voice echoing throughout the command deck. "Commander Winters, I have detected a vulnerability in the enemy fleet." Winters' heart skipped. "What vulnerability? What do you mean?" The Xalan have formed a central command ship, located in the heart of their formation. The ship is heavily shielded, but if its power core is breached, the entire fleet will be disabled. I suggest targeting it." Winters didn't hesitate. She had always known that this would be a fight for survival, but now there was a chance. A single thread of hope. "Target the central command ship," Winters ordered. "All power to the forward weapons. We go for the heart." Markson's voice rang through the bridge as he worked frantically to reconfigure the Titanus's power systems. "Commander, we can overload the main guns for a single devastating shot. It'll take everything we've got. But if we hit their core, we'll cripple them." Winters looked out the viewport, where the Xalan ships swarmed like a deadly cloud, their weapons crackling with energy. Time was running out. Their fleet was being shredded, and their chances of survival were growing slimmer with every passing moment. "Do it," Winters commanded. "Fire everything we've got. All of it. We end this now." There was a tense moment of silence before the Titanus surged forward, its engines roaring to life, fueled by the last of its power reserves. The forward guns flared, charging up with an intensity that illuminated the darkness of space. The crew held their breath. The Xalan fleet scattered, attempting to intercept the Titanus, but it was too late. With a deafening roar, the Titanus unleashed its full power, a massive burst of energy that tore through the void. The shot struck the Xalan command ship square in its center. For a moment, there was nothing but a blinding flash of light. The force of the explosion sent shockwaves through space, rippling outward and shaking the remaining enemy ships. The Xalan command ship shattered in an instant, its power core igniting in a violent explosion. The entire Xalan fleet seemed to freeze in place. The remaining Xalan ships, leaderless and disorganized, faltered. Humanity's fleet pressed forward with renewed strength, attacking the scattered ships with everything they had. The tide was turning, but the victory came at a price. The Titanus was not without its wounds. Its hull was scared, its systems failing, but it had done what it was meant to do. The heart of the Xalan fleet had been destroyed. Winters stood tall, her face grim yet resolute. "We've won, but it's not over. Not yet." The battle had been fierce. The war was far from over. But for the first time in centuries, humanity had proven something to the stars. They would fight, and they would survive.